Great. Yes. Thanks, Megan. And yes, thanks for having me. For those that I haven't met before, I'm Joe Forbes. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers. I work out of the Engineer Research and Development Center with Elissa, focusing mainly on FIRO projects. So I have the pleasure of introducing her and the topic that she's going to present on today. So let me give you a little bit of a background on Elissa here. Like me, she's a research engineer out of the Coastal and Hydraulics Laboratory as part of the Engineer Research and Development Center, which is located in Vicksburg. Um, she has a bachelor's degree in economics and one in civil engineering from UT Austin, and a master's degree in civil engineering from Mississippi State, and is a PhD candidate in civil engineering out of the University of Georgia. And then besides attempting to tackle complex water resource challenges on interdisciplinary teams, she likes to host theme parties and enjoy the local art scene. So that's also very important for you guys to know, and gives a little flavor to Elissa for you guys to experience here. And as Megan already introduced, Elissa is going to be talking about the FIRO screening process today and how that can and is looking to potentially overlap with managed aquifer recharge type opportunities. So one other note I'll make is please, if you have any questions, enter them in the chat during her talk, and we've got some time, as Megan said, to go through those questions at the end, and I'd be happy to facilitate that. So without further ado, Elissa, take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Megan. Okay, let me start sharing my screen. And then start my slides. Okay, so are you guys, everybody seeing slides correctly? Great, thank you. Okay, so yeah, thank you for the introduction. So I'm Elissa Yeates. I'm a researcher at the Coastal and Hydraulics Laboratory. Joe mentioned that's in Vicksburg, which is Vicksburg, Mississippi, on the Mississippi River. So I am not in California, but have been working a lot with Californians on FIRO projects for the past several years, and really enjoyed that. So yes, I will be giving an overview of the nationwide FIRO screening process. So talking a bit about what FIRO is and then how we're assessing the Corps' portfolio nationwide for potential to assess and implement FIRO at more sites. And I am by no means a managed aquifer recharge expert. My interaction with MAR has come through the lens of these FIRO projects, but I did try to brush up a little bit more on that before speaking with this group so that I can draw some connections there. And am excited to learn from you guys more about how we might be considering potential for MAR in our nationwide assessment. So what is FIRO? That stands for Forecast-Informed Reservoir Operations, which is an operational strategy that is intended to take advantage of advances in meteorological forecasting. So to better capture atmospheric precipitation forecasts in making decisions to retain and release water. Historically, Corps dams, and I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody at the Corps of Engineers, but this is, of course, true for a lot of other dams in the United States, are making release decisions more conservatively based on water on the ground. So most of the water control manuals for Corps reservoirs, which were mostly constructed in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, are not structured to take advantage of atmospheric forecast ability, because forecastability was really poor prior to current decades and advances. So the FIRO strategy is intended to take advantage of these improvements in weather forecasting so that in advance of extreme precipitation occurring, water operators can make more strategic decisions to retain or release water. And this graphic here is showing an example of what FIRO implementation is looking like at Lake Mendocino on the Russian River, which is the first USACE FIRO pilot site. So, historically, that that operating curve would only allow storage up to the lower dotted line there the FIRO deviation zone was implemented as part of a deviation request following the Lake Mendocino viability assessment at that site. You can see here, this was in water year 2019, I think, which was the first year that that deviation was in place. That additional flexibility that had been determined by assessing how skillful forecasts are for extreme precipitation at that site. And then following from that, how large that flexible buffer pool could be, enabled additional storage of inflow up to that higher dashed line. And so by the end of that water year, which was the first water year that this deviation was in place, the water managers at this site were able to conserve an additional 20% of water volume storage than what would have been conserved under the historical, traditional rule curve. So this is just a schematic illustrating how FIRO produced an additional flexible storage and water availability going into the dry part of the year at one site when it was implemented. Of course, that wouldn't be the outcome for every water year or every site, but this was a kind of early win in the R&D program that has really created a lot of demand for expansion in the program, kind of proof of concept and actual water storage leading to demonstrable benefits in terms of supply availability, irrigation, flood risk management, et cetera. So just with that high level explanation, quickly of what FIRO is, I wanted to pull this group to see what is the general understanding of FIRO before this presentation. So we've got a poll question here just asking how familiar you might have been with this concept before. Got a couple co-authors here. I knew we'd have Adam on the line, wasn't sure. I guess Joe. Great. And then a few people who are new to this concept. And I also want to acknowledge that, FIRO, Forecast-Informed Reservoir Operations, this is the conceptualization of this strategy, within the Corps of Engineers currently, but we didn't invent this concept. Forecast coordinated operations had already been implemented at core dams. Bureau of Reclamation operators have considered forecasts and release decisions. The current FIRO program is working to assess what are the strategic boundaries of this strategy at specific sites and developing a process for implementing that and encoding it in water control manuals. But water managers have been using forecasts in one way or another for a long time. So I just wanted to acknowledge that the concept is broader than just the specific research and operations program. Megan, for the poll, do I need to click share so other people can see, or are people able to see results on their own screen here?
Oh, I was sharing it. I just stopped.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. Thank you. Just wanted to check. Yeah, I think that this is an interesting distribution of familiarity with the concept. So thank you guys for supplying me with that context. Okay, so I've already talked a little bit about this, but just another few points to understand about what FIRO is or is not when it's implemented at a site before I get into how we're assessing the potential for this strategy broadly across our portfolio of reservoirs. So we are carefully assessing the skill of precipitation forecasts, watershed response, the availability of observations, of inflow forecast models and tools, of decision support infrastructure that can enable the use of all of this information in making storage and release decisions. So that's all part of what is the FIRO viability assessment process. So we've undertaken these pilot studies at several sites. I've got a map a few slides later that shows where those are. And this has consisted of a multiple year viability assessment study process that results in something like this diagram showing what is the volume and timing of this additional flexibility in the water control plan that enables the use of forecasts to add additional storage and release capability. So, the key thing to understand about the benefit that FIRO can bring at a site is that it's adding additional flexibility to the decisions that water managers are making. They still have discretion over how that space is used, and there is not a water reallocation associated with that. This additional flexibility is, within the boundaries of what is already established as, the different parts of the flood control space, water supply space, conservation pool, et cetera. It's just encoding additional flexibility there. So as a result, water managers can make pre-releases in advance of forecasted precipitation. They can change the timing or hold precipitation, whereas before, if they had reached a point in the roll curve that would have necessitated releases. And so again, just adding that additional flexibility in the timing and volume of those releases. So of course, a really key factor in how this is implemented is the forecast skill. So what are the predominant drivers of extreme precipitation for the contributing watershed to the site? What are other characteristics about the configuration of the reservoir in terms of its outlet capacity, downstream channel capacity? Are there additional inflows between the outlet of the reservoir and the downstream flood control point? Are those other inflows also controlled or not? There are a lot of different factors that play into what is the required forecast lead time at which that information needs to be reliable and skillful to be able to safely make these decisions. And I also want to point out that from the Corps' perspective, the primary authorized purpose of the reservoirs that we have applied FIRO to this point is flood control. So these other authorized purposes, including, environmental benefit, recreation, water supply availability, for the part of the pool that's managed by a partner, those are subsidiary to the primary objective of flood risk management. So from our perspective, the objective of these viability assessments has to be, what is the additional flexibility that we can add in to the management of this reservoir that's not going to be negatively affecting the ability to manage the flood pool, right? So that's primary. And the viability assessments at Mendocino and Prado Dam have also demonstrated a benefit to flood risk management. So this additional flexibility to make releases in advance of a forecasted storm actually improves the flood risk management outcomes, which has been an interesting finding of these studies, because I think the perception prior to going through that viability assessment exercise is that, this is a concession that the Corps is making for these other objectives of the reservoir to be optimized, that we're having to relinquish a little control over that flood risk management objective, maybe, or I guess, not being so conservative with an eye to flood risk management in order to improve water supply outcomes or these other outcomes, when in actuality, this additional flexibility is also bolstering flood risk management, at least in terms of the pilot studies. So our key research partner in the research aspect of this research and operations program, so we're both assessing kind of what are the boundaries of how well FIRO can be done, from the research perspective, it's like, how flexible can we make it? And then from the operational perspective, in implementation, that tends to be more constrained, right? But our key partner in the atmospheric science R&D is Scripps Institution of Oceanography, the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. And that's because the pilot sites, which the first 4 pilot sites have all been in California. We're now adding pilots in Oregon and Washington with the eye toward national expansion where possible. But these pilot sites are all reservoirs where the key driver of extreme precipitation is atmospheric rivers. And CW3E, the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes at Scripps, and Marty Ralph, who's the co-chair of the FIRO Atmospheric Science Research Arm, this center really specializes in improving forecast skill of atmospheric rivers and leads the nation in developing the atmospheric forecast models that are ingesting the right information to be able to accurately, make gains in the forecasting the intensity, location, duration, aerial extent of these atmospheric river events. So there are a number of articles that have come out, in conjunction with this R&D program that are kind of defining atmospheric river intensity scales. Some popular science publications, if you're curious, that explain, for a non-meteorologist, how ARs function and how we're able to improve the forecasts of them. But that has been a really key aspect of being able to implement FIRO at these sites, is having that reliability in the forecast of these drivers of extreme precipitation. So I've mentioned several times our pilot sites in California. So the first one was Lake Mendocino on the Russian River. The second was Prado Dam, just outside of LA. And then we've got New Bullards Bar and Oroville. So this was the first FIRO's pilot study that considered more than one site in conjunction. Those dams are on the Yuba and Feather upstream of the confluence, so had to be considered in conjunction with the update to their water control manuals. And now we're bringing on Howard Hansen in the Seattle district. And then the big challenge upcoming is the FIRO study on the Willamette Valley. So this is a system on the Willamette River and its tributaries, consisting of 13 core reservoirs and a Bureau of Reclamation reservoir. So that's going to be, just orders of magnitude more complex to assess and implement changes in operations. But we're really excited in the program to start assessing that because, the majority of reservoirs in the Corps portfolio are not single sites on a river that, have no other control structures downstream. So we need to be able to assess how adding this flexibility into individual control structures on a system can be done reliably and optimally. So that's going to be a project to watch. We're excited about that. And then now we're bringing follow-on projects. So Lake Mendocino, that the team that was put together to lead the viability assessment at Lake Mendocino is now turning their attention to Lake Sonoma. And there's a similar situation where a lot of people who were involved in the Prado Dam viability assessment are also contributing to the Seven Oaks Dam in San Bernardino. So it's also been exciting to see this growth of the program in terms of regional expert teams being able to inform and contribute to additional studies in their areas of expertise. And just a little, I don't know that I need to really sell the benefit of additional flexibility in dam operations, but at the pilot sites where deviations to normal operations have been requested and approved based on the results of the viability assessments, like the storage curve that I was showing for Lake Mendocino that led to 20% higher storage volume going into the next water year. There have been demonstrated gains in terms of supply reliability, flood risk management. We've got some statistics here on additional acre feet and how many homes that can provide water to for a year at different pilot sites. So the return on investment from the R&D side of this has already been quite high, just in terms of additional water supply, ability to meet these other objectives. And that's just for single years of implementation. Whereas the outcome of a FIRO viability assessment is to inform a water control manual so that, from that point forward, every water year, that reservoir can be operated with more flexibility. So we, would expect to see that those same benefits accruing across multiple water years. Of course, higher benefits if in years where that additional flexibility, we're really able to take advantage of that. Maybe in wetter years versus drier years, that calculus of how beneficial this strategy is might change. But overall, we're seeing, already kind of fruits of these studies, especially as changes to water control manuals are able to take effect. Now, I was excited to see Will Logan called in on this because, in preparation for this, I was learning more about managed aquifer recharge across the Corps of Engineers and how that's been approached. And I found this MAR and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Water Security Through Resilience report from the Institute of Water Resources a few years ago, of which Will Logan was the author. So, Will, I'm quoting you here on this slide. I don't know if there's anything else you would want to add, but my exposure to managed aquifer recharge has only been through my participation in an exposure to FIRO viability assessments, specifically at Prado. So I know we've got Adam on the line too. So maybe in the discussion portion, we can hear from Will and Adam specifically about MAR and their experiences with the potential for FIRO to bolster these objectives of managed aquifer recharge. But I was really struck by what Will wrote in this report, talking about, our water resource infrastructure in the US is very constrained. Like our challenges are increasing, more urbanization, more demands on all of these resources. The volume of water in a particular reservoir, might be relied upon for municipal and industrial use, agricultural use, flood risk management, recreation, other types of withdrawals, right? So there are a lot of straws in these reservoirs and a lot of demand. And, one thing I've been thinking about just as an engineer who's kind of trained to consider risk and resilience, right? If we're thinking only in terms of flood risk, but neglecting risk of drought or risk of, not having sufficient agricultural yields, et cetera, all these other water-related risks, then we're not really serving the nation appropriately, right? We need to be able to balance all of these different water needs and demands, especially under these intensifying conditions and changes in demand. So, Will was highlighting this in terms of MAR as a strategy for improving resilience in how the Corps is managing water. I think in FIRO, we've been coming to the same conclusions, but in thinking about how, we're allowing more flexibility and optimization across all these different stakeholder groups and uses of the volumes in each of these reservoirs. So it's exciting to see that, there's maybe potential for using FIRO as a way to boost MAR at more sites, and maybe also the way that researchers and other, water managers and others have been thinking about MAR as a strategy to build resilience. FIRO can maybe augment or improve that. So I just see a lot of potential for synergy between these two different strategies to maybe, expand each other's reach. And again, I wanted to point out that Prado was the first FIRO pilot study with a really strong emphasis on managed aquifer recharge. So the recharge basins downstream of Prado Dam are enhancing the ability of releases from Prado to infiltrate, to the maximum extent practicable in those spreading basins was the primary motivation for the FIRO viability assessment study at Prado. So I've linked to the FVA, the final viability assessment at Prado Dam there. One of the findings from that study is that implementing FIRO at Prado is estimated to yield 4,000 to 6,000 acre feet annually of additional recharge into those basins. So that's a major win of this study. And I'm sure Adam could tell you a lot more about that, and maybe we can get into it more in the Q&A, but I just wanted to point people to that study as a good place to learn more about how FIRO implementation has been supporting managed aquifer recharge. Okay, so then getting in a little bit into my projects in the FIRO program. So this is part of our third phase of this R&D program. So phase one of FIRO was kind of proof of concept, the Mendocino viability assessment, beginning the study at Prado, and really determining whether this concept would be useful or possible to implement at core dams. Phase two of the FIRO program was expanding a little bit more, so adding the Yuba or the New Bullards Bar and Oroville sites, and then bringing in Howard Hanson, not quite Willamette yet, that one's not online, but expanding the concept to a few more regions, different climatologies, different orientations of reservoirs and their basins, to expand the knowledge set of what this might look like in practice. And then now phase 3 is national expansion. So completing those viability assessment studies, implementing the results of those findings and the FIRO operational strategies that were determined in these site studies into the water control plans for those studies, finalizing that pathway to actual implementation. We're adding in the Willamette Valley system of dams. So, again, that massively scaled up challenge of how do we add flexibility across the large system. We will be adding more viability assessment pilot studies at sites in other regions. So not only in the West Coast, but looking at sites where the drivers of extreme precipitation might be different types of precipitation. And then assessing FIRO nationally at a screening level. So we undertook this, started scoping out what the screening would look like in end of 2021. And it's been a really complex challenge. So, you would think, okay, FIRO works at several sites. We've kind of seen how it gets implemented. Surely it wouldn't be that difficult to determine what are the key characteristics of a reservoir or set of reservoirs that make it a good candidate for this operational strategy. But it has been quite complex because we can't focus only on forecast skill or only on hydraulics. There are these other dimensions of FIRO suitability that I'll get into that have made this problem of optimizing where the Corps invests their R&D funding and looks at updating water control manuals next, has made that a little more complicated than we first thought. So the goals of the screening process effort are to look at the whole core portfolio of reservoirs, which is 500 plus dam structures, and assess where there is potential or suitability to be able to assess more deeply and implement forecast-informed reservoir operations. We have really two objectives, I think. So one is the downward looking, site by site specific objective of how can we help water managers in each region assess their portfolio of sites and identify which ones could or should go forward with FIRO, and then help connect that with a recommendation of what to do next. What would it look like to do the FIRO study at the site? What resources can we connect those water managers with? What kind of capacity do we at the national program have to support these viability assessments at these different sites? How might we need to tailor or modify our process to do that, et cetera? And then the more congressionally mandated kind of upward looking outcome of this effort is to be able to provide a national prioritization of where should we try to implement this strategy next? Where is the most kind of return on the investment for doing FIRO? How can we, within the Corps sort of, optimize where we're going next? And the Water Resources Development Act of 2024 specifically called out the Northwestern Division and the South Atlantic Division of the Corps. You can see here on the map, where those are located as needing to be fully assessed for FIRO potential. And WRDA 2024 also directs the Corps to implement FIRO to the maximum extent practicable across, our full portfolio. So part of what we're trying to do with this national screening process effort is start determining that what is the maximum extent practicable? Are we able to eliminate from consideration sites that are broadly unsuitable for FIRO, and then kind of determine where we need to go next? So we have finished conducting this assessment within the South Pacific Division. We're finalizing our recommendations and site assessment reports now. And we have done the stage A initial screening across the national portfolio. And then we'll be looking at Northwestern Division and South Atlantic Division next. for that more in-depth stage B assessment. So what do I mean by stage A, stage B, screening, et cetera? So we determined early on in this effort that it would be most efficient to do this nationwide screening in multiple stages. So the first stage, stage A, we're imagining that as just like, if you've got a list of all the core dams, is there a set you can cross off with a Sharpie? You know, we can't do it here, can't do it here. We don't need to waste anybody's time considering it any further. So like a very high level filtering. For my civil engineers in the house, you know, I'm imagining one of those sediment test sieves where you're doing a grain size distribution. Stage A is like the widest weave, you know, the top basket in your sieve. So we've got an 8-item data collection instrument that we've given to all the water managers across the Corps, and they have provided back information at every water control, you know, dam, lock and dam, anything that was in the list of dams and reservoir systems for the Corps. They've provided all of that information back. So our prohibitive barriers, we're eliminating sites from further consideration if they don't have a controlled outlet. There's no dial to turn. You can't really do FIRO if you're not making decisions about releases, or no water control plan, which is similar, but there's not complete overlap in those. Or we've been able to determine by several metrics that forecast skill is insufficient to do FIRO here. And then we're passing sites through if those barriers aren't, you know, triggered in our assessment. And then we've also got this kind of significant barrier category where there are legal or technical barriers, maybe issues with dam safety where the water control plan can't be modified until other things are addressed, or there's issues with stakeholder engagement, or the metrics for forecast skill were indeterminate or conflicting. So that's that yellow category. We're kind of deprioritizing those sites for further consideration. So that's the outcome from stage A, which we're currently finalizing nationwide. So then the more in-depth suitability assessment, or stage B, that's where we're going site by site and soliciting much more in-depth qualitative information from water managers about operations at that project, in an attempt to assess and balance the potential for benefit of gaining additional flexibility in those release decisions with the potential level of difficulty or level of effort for doing that assessment and implementation. And then all of that is underpinned by a more in-depth assessment of the forecast skill at that site. So the forecast skill assessments are being conducted separately by a team of meteorologists, both within the Corps and at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And then the rest of that qualitative and quantitative information is provided by the water managers and then analyzed and produced into site assessment reports and recommended next steps by our national FIRO team. So we've been conducting this across the South Pacific Division. The outcomes of that stage B assessment then inform a dialogue between the FIRO national lead team and the district water managers. We also invite at that stage, or we invite the districts at that stage to invite other stakeholders. So if they've been working closely, you know, with a water supply agency or other partner that is demonstrating interest in FIRO, we want to start building those bridges across stakeholder teams so that if a FIRO study was to be implemented at that site, you know, we've already opened those channels of communication. And the outcome of this is a suitability score, a recommended next step, and then, yeah, kind of connecting those water management teams with resources that they would need to then start scoping out a FIRO viability assessment and ultimately a water control manual update. I think I want to leave a little time for discussion, so I don't need to belabor so much, but we've got several metrics for forecast skill. I don't know if we have any meteorologists on the line here, but if you're interested, you know, there's publications being produced from those at CW3E about this nationwide forecast skill assessment. One thing I want to highlight that we're doing in our effort here, you know, we're not just looking at how skillful is the quantitative precipitation forecast in whatever contributing basin. We're also trying to contextualize that within operational requirements of the site. So I mentioned earlier, what is that stored volume? What might be the percent of the volume that would be beneficial to make flexible? What is the outlet capacity, downstream channel capacity, other constraints in terms of downstream flood control points, other inflows, et cetera. So we've got a methodology where we've solicited all this component information from the nationwide water manager population and are able to calculate kind of our best guess at minimum necessary lead times to implement FIRO for a site. And then the forecast skill assessment is done for that lead time, right? So you wouldn't want to just compare like the 5-day forecast at one site to another. It really matters whether a 5-day forecast would be useful at that site. Is that enough time to evacuate additional stored volumes? So we're trying to contextualize that meteorological assessment within hydraulics and operational constraints for the site. So we've done this stage A assessment nationwide. From that, we've been able to eliminate about 1/3 of the Corps' reservoirs from further consideration. An additional 1/5 or so are coming up as green, so none of those stage A barriers apply to about 20% of our portfolio. And then the vast majority fall into this middle territory, where there are potential barriers, additional complexity, uncertain forecast skills. So we're kind of deprioritizing those sites for this phase, unless the water manager teams request, that we move those sites forward. And one thing that we found when we were testing this process out for the first time in the South Pacific Division is that a lot of times sites with these additional barriers, like issues with stakeholder engagement among everybody with a stake in the reservoir, or other potential technical barriers at the site, like for example, maybe sites with a lot of environmental quality constraints. Those are the sites that benefit the most from potential FIRO implementation. Like the things that make the site potentially more difficult to implement a change in operations also are the things that mean that site would benefit the most from that additional flexibility. So we're certainly not tabling those sites indefinitely. And I think there might be a lot of really beneficial potential there, but we're probably not going to prioritize those first. So I don't know, Joe, can I do like 5 more minutes of talking and then leave 10 for Q&A? Does that sound good? Or can't see if we're getting questions in the chat or anything. So
we do have a couple so far, but yeah, I think if you want to spend no more than 5 minutes to finish out and wrap up, then then I think 10 will be good.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thanks everyone. I know it's a lot of content, so hopefully this isn't just like too much information, all at once, but it's just so interesting, right? So the stage B instrument, I bring this up because my poll question for this group is, if you have ideas about how we can best capture the potential benefit of flexibility in terms of managed aquifer recharge. So we do have questions in our more in-depth second stage instrument that go to the core water management community, asking whether there is interest among stakeholders at the site to improve operations, including specifically for groundwater recharge. And then we also have I was like looking back at our instrument earlier this week to think about what I would want to highlight for this group. There's a lot of focus on the potential for stakeholders to commit to the process of conducting a viability assessment and recommending alternatives under which these different stakeholders would be compromising or gaining flexibility in some conditions and maybe losing flexibility to other stakeholders at other conditions, right? So it's really critical for this process to work, for everybody who has a stake in the operations of the reservoir to be like game for participating in that viability assessment process. So that is something that we're trying to assess in the screening process because it's critical to whether FIRO can be successfully implemented at a site. We're also considering whether the decision support tools that are available are robust. If they're not, that has been an aspect of the pilot sites is developing better decision support tools for these operational decisions. But I think when we're considering nationwide prioritization, it's important to know kind of what's the current status at different sites in terms of decision support. And then also thinking about environmental context, are there protected species, and would there be benefit for additional flexibility, or would that be, more constraint in terms of updating the water control manual? So these are some of the things that we're assessing in that stage B of screening. And then thinking about forecast skill in terms of ability to accurately forecast extreme precipitation, ability to accurately forecast long runs of dry or no precipitation, and then what is the tolerance of that basin and that reservoir to absorb any, the kind of expected failure of the forecast. So, it's very multidimensional and complicated, but, it's a great opportunity to develop this kind of nationwide understanding of our operations and where there's potential to add flexibility to those operations. So as we're in the process of doing that, we don't want to miss the opportunity to support MAR by gathering that information specifically. So the outcome from the full process at a site level looks like this kind of, level of effort versus potential for benefit of additional flexibility. What is the state of forecast skill in that basin to support additional flexibility? And then what is the associated recommendation for that water management team in terms of should they move forward with pursuing FIRO or not? And we have assessed the 4 core districts within the South Pacific Division for that. And this is, it's not finalized. We're currently undergoing those dialogues and finalizations, but this is the snapshot right now in terms of where there is potential for changes in water control manuals to be more forecast informed. So, I saw in the poll that this group is largely California based. So it's exciting that there's a lot of potential to continue assessing and implementing FIRO at sites in California. And we're working on multiple publications. We've already got the site result reports that are going to the districts. So if there's a particular reservoir that you're interested in, you can reach out to water managers at the core district to get more information about that. We're not sharing those reports out directly. Those all go through the water management teams. But then we're also working on technical reports, journal articles, and other, we've got like a story map, other publications to broadly explain the methodology and the results there. So my poll question for this group is, how can we best capture potential for managed aquifer recharge as an aspect of improved flexibility associated with FIRO? And I showed you guys some of those questions or topics that we're already including in our instrument, but I just would love the insight of this group to see, is there another way we should be thinking about this, another question we should be asking, or maybe other resources if you know of, opportunity reports or other like information sources that we can be aligning with what we're doing to better assess potential for FIRO MAR. And let's see, I will put up here. So we've got like a couple pager guide to the screening process. We've got our interactive story map that has not been updated with all of the stage B results yet, or the nationwide stage A results, because we're finalizing those and giving the core districts kind of, ability to review those, make any changes before we publicize anything. But that will be coming out soon. We've got webinars for the core water management community. And if anybody's interested in, resources targeting a different population, let Joe know and he can help you. And then I did want to highlight the importance of stakeholder engagement. Adam can attest to this, Joe can attest to this, anybody else who's been involved in a FIRO project. The steering committees for each pilot site are really carefully developed. The goal is for everyone with stake in operations to be well represented and on board with the way that the study is being done at every step. Each of the pilots have had points where, you know, the process kind of ground to a halt because somebody was uncomfortable with something or had questions or wanted to try something else. And so that's been really key to success at the pilots. So just a plug for collaboration in these studies, and a big thank you to all the partners who've been really key in that.
I have left the poll running. I want to end it and try to share out the results. I had thought that short answers would be displayed on screen, but let's see. No. Okay. I have to do view details. Hold on, give me one quick second.
Okay.
Yep, thanks, Megan.
Can I take over screen share?
Sure.
So you would check these out. Okay, there we go. Tell me when you would like me to scroll down.
Great. Yes. So thinking about climate change, absolutely. Yeah, changing hydrologic conditions, period of, you know, return period, et cetera. Evaluation of atmospheric rivers and strength. Status reports. Yes, great. Downstream diversion potential. Yeah, I think that I would be interested if anybody has thoughts on how to do that at a screening level. I mean, that could absolutely be part of a viability assessment, right? Where you're more focused specifically on one site. But at the screening level, you know, we're asking whether there's already MAR that could be improved by flexibility. Maybe we could ask if there's potential to implement MAR where it's not already, if the FIRO study would enable that. But I don't know of a way that we could like easily assess that independent of the information that we're gathering from water managers. Open forum, yes. And that brings me to another point that I wanted to make. In screening, we're very much targeting the core water management community as kind of our customers and first point of contact for these assessments. But, you know, a lot of the pilot sites, FIRO assessment and implementation has been driven by non-federal sponsors, right? The water supply agencies, the state water development agencies, other local, state, non-federal sponsors. So we don't want to shut those groups out of screening, but at the same time, we don't want to go around the core water managers. So that's been a little bit delicate. And one thing that we're considering is, you know, also inviting non-core stakeholders to fill out the Stage B questionnaire and provide their, I don't know, I guess assess their own demand for or willingness to participate in these types of studies. But if people have suggestions about ways that they would like to be engaged about FIRO screening in their regions, we're definitely open to that. Yes, Adam, including downstream MAR facilities. That's already part of our Stage B. So these are great. And let me see, I can pull open the chat now. It's okay to call it FIRO. Our core national hydraulics lead still calls it FIRO. I think it's just like a potato thing.
Yep. One of the first questions, Elissa, I think came after that FIRO comment about whether or not downstream diversions for MAR on agricultural or working lands have been a factor for making FIRO decisions, like real world operational decisions. And so if you have an example to share, that'd be great. But Adam's online as well, that could probably speak to that specifically. Did you want to take a crack at it or just hand it over to Adam?
I don't know about any of the viability assessment or pilot projects where that specifically has been done. I was only aware of, existing recharge basins. Adam, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think Jim Weeking had done a lot of work up in the San Joaquin watershed looking at potential MAR and FIRO together. So Jim might be in a better position to maybe chime in on that. Jim, would you be able to do that? Be listening?
I can comment on it too.
Yeah,
Working with Jim on that, we've been the ones assessing that recharge or that potential for diversion. And I think, you're right, Elissa, that at a screening level, it doesn't work at the level that we've been doing it. But I think a quick method is just even assessing how much diversion potential there is under existing irrigation districts. Just as you assess the channel capacity for FIRO, thinking about what the turnout capacities are for districts. They may or may not have the basins constructed, but we've been really evaluating what's the recharge potential across the landscape, which is really potential. We have to caution it that way, but at least it tells you there is a way to get the water off the channel if you have a FIRO operational system in place. Jim's there now.
So is that something that you've seen done kind of at a site by site, or is there a statewide analysis or regional analysis of this that we could maybe make use of?
We've been doing it region by or site by site. But what made me think about it was just even knowing what the headgate diversion capacity is. If you've got irrigation districts with diversion capacity, it's very different than a river that doesn't have any offlow channel diversion capacities. Similarly, any flood weirs that can take water off, of course, is another approach.
Right. And that's really inextricably linked with the way we're assessing even forecast skill, right? So we're assessing outflow and downstream channel capacity. And if there's that additional water storage capacity that would enable more storage in advance of an event or increase the reaction time maybe to an event, that could lead to potential for FIRO at more sites where we're not considering that. So great, thank you. I will email you. I want to know more.
Hey, Elissa and Joe.
Hey,
this
Jim.
is Jim Weeking. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So I'm putting together an email right now where describing that we'd love to get together with the two of you and just get our reaction to what we've done in our studies. We've been fortunate to have some participation from Sacramento District in our studies and local water interest. So yeah, I'll send the email and maybe we can get together and have a conversation about what we've done and some of the results that we're seeing from some of the things that you've just been talking with Daniel and Adam about.
Great.
Great, thanks, Jim. Elissa, a question for you. In the chat here is, in general, are USACE owned reservoirs prioritized in the screening process? Could you talk a little bit more about what swath or inventory of reservoirs the screening process is looking at?
Yes, we're working from the core portfolio as our population of interest, but early on decided that we wanted to develop the process agnostic of the dam owner. So we have had interaction with the Bureau of Reclamation early on in developing the structure of the process, and we've been staying in touch. They've got other assessments of potential for forecast coordinated operations, and we're sharing information there. Yeah, we're certainly happy to share methodologies with other dam owners or interested stakeholders and have forthcoming publications that detail all of that too. And then I see also the second part of Roman's question here. The viability report is a critical piece of the process. Can it be supplemented by year-to-year derogation to test a FIRO MAR project? Oh, yeah, the deviation before water control manual update is done, I think is.
Yep.
Which, right, that's already been part of the projects at pilot sites, is that kind of proof of concept and support for operational deviations before the water control plan update process is finished.
And one detail to add, Elissa, is that it's not just Corps of Engineers owned projects. It's also ones that the Corps regulates and therefore like prescribes their flood control or potentially their navigation operations via a water control manual. So it's really all reservoirs that have a Corps of Engineers prescribed water control manual. And so it could be owned by the Corps or it could be owned by another entity. And that category of reservoirs is typically called Section 7 reservoirs. So reservoirs like Oroville, Shasta, those are some bigger ones in our state here in California as examples of ones that aren't owned by the Corps, but are being screened as part of the screening process.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
I also wanted, I know we're over time, but I just wanted to throw out quickly that I'm really interested in the potential for FIRO to enable other types of watershed reconnection or restoration efforts and vice versa to be enabled by those types of efforts. So that goes to some of the other points here in the comments about how, you know, reconnecting with groundwater can increase stakeholder participation and support. Kamiar said that. And yeah, I think that there is a lot of potential for broader watershed management to benefit from additional flexibility, but then also for our ability to implement that to benefit from these other restoration or whole watershed approaches and the relationships that are being built and just the broader like participation, collaboration, infrastructure that some of these other initiatives are really blazing the trail on. So yeah, thank you guys all for participating and listening.
Yep. Great job, Elissa. Thank you. I don't think we skipped any questions in the chat. If so, please let me know. But I think, Megan, I think that wraps it up. Not too much over the time and for good discussion purposes. So I think it was worth it.
Agreed. Thank you, Elissa. Thank you, Joe. And thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We will see you next month on the first Wednesday, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. One theory is something got mixed up as we crossed over that daylight savings time threshold. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, 12:30 to 1:30 next month, first Wednesday. Thank you. We'll get the recording posted in a couple of days.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Great.
Nicely
Yes.
done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elissa.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you for answering the questions. Very nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.